Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of How to Build a Game Studio. I am Trevor Oz, and I am joined today by the one and only Jack Steele.
What's up, guys?
And our fearless leader, Kent Gamble.
That was my nickname in elementary school, believe it or not.
Our fearless leader?
Fearless leader, because I ran the freeze tag group. It was a big responsibility. I had to pick who was it, and that was it. That was the entirety of my.
Oh, yeah, it's very brave.
Yeah, it was a pretty intense job, but I took it seriously.
So I gotta ask the question then: is there more responsibility in running a game studio or being the fearless leader of freeze tag?
Clearly, freeze tag. I don't have to choose who's it when I'm working with you guys, so I don't think I could handle that these days.
Well, I think it's because you're always it. So
true. It's pretty hard to tag you guys when you're thousands of miles away.
So I don't know how to follow that. All right, guys,
I've already derailed this. All right, sorry about that.
That's the podcast, guys. All right, see you next time we do this.
We can go back to talking about Kevin Sorbo.
So yeah, we had a big long conversation about Kevin Sorbo, and for some reason or another, we used to around the old tabletop game, we had a figure of Hercules?
Yeah, it was like a Hercules action figure from Hercules: The Legendary Journeys show.
So that's how we started talking about Kevin Sorbo, and then
we decided to talk about his entire career.
Yeah, he's pretty awesome. Kevin Sorbo is the man.
We did a deep dive, and then we considered, could we get Kevin Sorbo on this podcast?
Yeah. If anyone listening has any connections with Kevin Sorbo, let him know that we would love to have him on the podcast. Not because he has anything to do whatsoever with this podcast, but just because it'd be cool to talk to Kevin Sorbo.
Yeah, I agree. So if you know Kevin Sorbo, drop him a line, tell him we want to talk to him, and that's that.
Mm-hmm.
So really, we're gathered here today to talk about the story of Externus, Path of the Solari. I'll shoot to Kent. So Kent, what's the story of Externus, Path of the Solari?
You just want me to start at the beginning and just tell the whole?
Yeah, just tell the
lay
whole
it all out right now.
Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah, just look at the picture of the Post-it notes and
buckle in. Are we talking about like specifically the game, or are we talking about kind of the world? What exactly are we looking to dive into here?
I think we should maybe talk about the world a bit, and then we can talk a little bit about the game. At least what we're willing to share right now.
Yeah, that's the toughest part. Is like I'm gonna have to think about it as I'm going to make sure I'm don't like. Oh, and also, Kaiser Soze's there. Oh, spoilers. It's a good reference if you haven't seen that movie. I won't say anything, but see that movie.
Or don't, whatever.
No, see it. It's awesome. It's really good.
See it. That's good.
Yeah, anyway. So, all right. So the world of Externus. Let's see. It's a hell of a thing to jump into.
Yeah, I mean, it's a world that, prefacing that, it's a world we all created together over a long period of time. So it's hard to like figure out the place to just dive in and jump in and be like, hey, this is our world.
Yeah, there's actually a lot going on. It's not like, well, it's really not your stereotypical kind of fantasy world where it's like, okay, this world is about this good guy over here and this bad guy over here, and they fight. Like, there's a lot of threads, a lot of which I don't want to talk too much about because either they are directly related to the game or not the game, but the game, the kind of major story of the game, or there's something you find about as you're playing the game, and I definitely want to avoid any kind of spoilers or, dulling any surprises. But okay, so let's see. The world of Externus, in kind of a nutshell, is long ago. No, I don't even want to talk about that because that's kind of important to the story. All right, we'll just talk about kind of present day Externus a little bit. So it has a lot of your kind of what you would think of as standard fantasy tropes, just as a kind of quick jumping in point. And that's because we feel we didn't really need to reinvent the wheel on everything. So it gives you a little bit of familiarity, but everything isn't exactly like it is all throughout the game. So, we have dwarves, but for example, dwarves are not necessarily the kind of standard battle axe wielding non-magic user type deals. We have elves, but we have a lot of different elves. Some of our elves are blue skinned, we have a lot of things. They're a little different most cases. As far as kind of the current state of the world in Externus, it is the current state. So humanity is definitely one of the the largest kind of race that's spread out across the world right now, because the history of the world is broken into several different eras, and the current one actually started when the Antiqulian Empire, which is often just referred to as the Empire in very classic kind of fantasy jargon, rose to prominence. And the way that they actually did this is there's a faction in the game known as the Technos. And the Technos they have time traveling capability. Although once they kind of got back to where they're at now, they found out that technology and magic don't actually play too nicely together. They actually don't work very well when they're in the vicinity. So basically they've kind of been trapped. So there's a small group of them, but because they have such powerful technology, the Empire kind of embraced this and moved a little bit further away from magic. So they were actually able to use this technology, partnering up with the Technos, and really kind of assert the dominance of humanity across the world. So that's kind of the setup for that stage. It's worth mentioning that, of course, this is not a non-magic world by any stretch of the imagination, because it's such a small area. Most of the rest of the world is still pretty heavily magic based. It's almost everyone has polytheistic beliefs, to where gods are actually, the strength of any given god is based upon how many believers that god has. So the more gods, the really popular gods, like, the king of the gods, or the god of war, the god of like fire, I think it's the goddess of fire, but they're obviously much more powerful because they have so many more believers that they're able to really kind of increase their strength and draw on strength through belief. Whereas some of the weaker gods, like speed or wandering, they still have, their place. They're still very powerful beings, but they're not quite as powerful because there's not as many people that are so solely dedicated to believing in these gods or worshiping these gods. So that's kind of a high level of the kind of demographics of this world, I guess.
And just to add to that, to take the god part of it and correlate it to the tabletop game. When we were playing the tabletop game, we would have a list of gods, and generally on our sheets we would choose 3 of them to pick from. So even at that level, we kind of had this polytheistic ideal going from when we started playing the game as well. So.
And yeah, one of the forces of change, and I'll get into exactly what I'm talking about by that. But one of the current forces of change in the world is that there is a monotheistic belief that is starting to spread across the world, which, of course, is at odds with the polytheistic belief. So the monotheist believe that these gods aren't actually gods. They're powerful beings, but they do not deserve their worship. And they actually believe in that there is one true God, and they are worshiping that God. And it is starting to kind of spread further out, and more people are beginning to turn to this, which in turn is weakening the gods. And that's actually kind of important in the fact that right at the beginning of the game, 2 of the gods have actually been killed, and that's kind of what spurs the game. It's what spurs the characters of the game into action, because they are part of a group called the Soldat Solari. And the Soldat Solari are an ancient order. They've been around for a really long time, and their kind of main goal, the whole reason they exist, is long ago in history of the world. I don't want to get too much into it because you actually find out more and more about this event as you play the game. But there was this huge kind of catastrophic event that happened, and that is when the Soldat were formed, and their kind of goal is to try to keep everything in balance. So it's not about good versus evil. It's actually just about everything needs to be balanced, because they don't want any kind of major shift in power to go to any being, any nation, any individual entity, because that there's then the potential for a huge kind of shift to the world and a possible second catastrophe to happen. So the Soldat Solari are basically starting to investigate the rumors, which up until this point, everyone has thought that they're actually just rumors, kind of just crazy tales told by, villagers, superstitious villagers about this thing. They're calling it the God Killer. They're calling it the Abomination. There's no concrete evidence. There's just these rumors about this thing that is out for trying to kill the gods, and everyone thought this was crazy until 2 of the lesser gods actually wound up dead, and that is kind of where the story begins, because your party is trying to figure out what exactly is going on and then how to stop it once they figure out what it is.
Yeah, I think that's a good summation of how we get to where the story begins, for sure.
Not sure where to go from there.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a big topic to tackle.
Yeah, so that's where the story begins. So for the party, when we first see the party, or at least what we see of the party in the demo. So the demo is actually a prologue to what will be going on in the actual main game. So when we first see the party, it's consisted of Osmond and Senna, and they've hired a mercenary. So with that, they seem a little bit undermanned, you could say.
Yeah, they're so the demo opens up, and they're basically you're kind of thrown into the middle of this mission where Cinna and Osmond are investigating a character named Gabriel, and Gabriel is one of the higher ups in this monotheistic order, and they have traveled into. So the reason they're not with a full contingent, there's a couple reasons. Number one, of course, is just a general issue with the fact that the Soldat Solari are, in general, way more undermanned, underpowered than they used to be, because they're focused around this event that happened so long ago. And, I mean, as I'm sure everyone is aware, just humans in general, as well as elves, dwarves, like all the sentient races, kind of, they eventually lose kind of the how important these things can be over many, many years, obviously. So I'd have to look at the actual dates, but I believe it's in the thousands of years since that kind of catastrophe happened. So these have faded kind of, instead of being horrific things that have just happened, they've faded from that into stories, into legends, almost into myths, after so many generations. And so because of that, the Soldat Solari are not nearly as big or powered or funded as they used to be. So generally speaking, the Soldat will move in smaller groups of between usually 2 to maybe 5, depending on what the mission is. And in addition to that, Osmond and Cinna are actually moving into the kingdom of Lodo, which is not a generally friendly nation to outsiders, and so they're trying to move with a much smaller party than they generally would. So that's kind of why we have this small group. They started off with just 2. They hired on actually a group of mercenaries, but it's actually mentioned if Trevor dies in the party, you will actually get the campfire scene where they allude to the fact that they've actually lost many people on this mission. And if Trevor survives, you actually don't see that. So that's quick segue, a good example of kind of like the difference between characters being alive or dead. You know, even though Trevor dies, it's unfortunate. You actually find out a lot more kind of about the general story and Osmond and Cinna, if that happens, than if Trevor survives. It's actually a much more lighthearted kind of experience where Trevor and Cinna actually are kind of like trading jabs with each other. They actually get on each other's nerves a little bit. Although they still really respect each other, so it was kind of fun to play with that kind of back and forth where they're basically talking shit on each other. So yeah, that's as you come in, you're actually right at kind of the end of this mission. The final few pieces, you've been kind of, Cinna and Osmond have been following Gabriel around, trying to get more information on this to report back to the Soldat Solari, and you're kind of coming in at the end of that whole mission.
Okay, so from that point, we mention Cinna and Osmond. Definitely talk about family and the importance of that. So at this moment, we know, and hopefully anybody that's listened to this or been paying attention to any of the stuff we've posted on our Kickstarter, our social media, anything like that, knows that Osmond has 2 sons, Ulrich and Amante. So what are they doing during this time?
So because of the fact that Soldat Solari are almost always traveling, they've pretty much, since being very young, have been traveling around with their father in almost kind of a nomadic fashion. They're almost always traveling. They're always on the go. They do have a home. In fact, at the beginning of the actual game, they're going to visit one of Ulrich's best friends, Yasamore, in their kind of hometown. But they're just not there very often. They're almost always traveling. However, since they're still both relatively young and relatively inexperienced, I mean, they're both capable warriors, but generally speaking, the Soldat are pretty much only involved in kind of major powers because of exactly what their kind of creed is. They're trying to stop major powers, balance things out. They're almost always kind of left to their own devices. So they have been traveling along with Osmond and Cinna, but because Osmond and Cinna were actually traveling into the Kingdom of Lodo, which is essentially a militarized zone and very, very dangerous, they were actually left outside of that country while Osmond and Cinna are questing in here to kind of get this information. So they've basically been almost left at home, so to speak. Obviously, they're not children, but they were left behind in a safer environment while Osmond and Cinna have moved to complete their mission, basically.
Which makes sense because both of the brothers are less experienced than Osmond or Cinna. And at this point, especially Ulrich, who's very headstrong, and would probably try to jump into situations that maybe he's not ready for with that. So Ulrich is actually Jack's character that he played during our tabletop game. So, Jack, you want to tell us a little bit about Ulrich?
He does not.
Yeah. Wasn't a whole lot to tell about him at this point. Like that's why it's mostly just thinking about like what can I even tell you about Ulrich right now. But from his point, the story sort of just covers like almost like a coming of age story for him, where he goes from, this small, like you mentioned, headstrong kid that just likes to get in fights to the leader of like a fairly competent group of heroes. And then just as the story progresses, as Ken had mentioned, it's a lot about just trying to find out what's going on and where he actually fits in the world. And then as you go on, like the story at first seems pretty black and white, but it just starts to reveal more and more gray.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the strength overall. Is we have characters like Ulrich, characters like, and you're going to have Amante, who obviously Amante was my character when we played. So they're brothers, so obviously they're probably going to have a bit of a difference of opinion on things at times, especially being brothers. So I know they'll butt heads. Obviously they're brothers, so they have a respect and a love for each other. But we all know how brothers in real life are and how they'll fight just to get on each other's nerves. So I'm sure there will definitely be some of that. Some of Amante being a little bit older, feeling that he's right in certain situations, where Ulrich will combat against that. So that's kind of the dynamic between them. But yeah, I think we have a lot of good characters that are all very different from each other. And I think we're going to have there's going to be a lot to introduce there. But yeah, where do you think we should go from here, Ken?
I just wanted to touch on a couple of ideas that while you guys were talking about that. One that Jack mentioned that I think is very, very important to kind of our world, without getting too much into it, is the idea of everything being kind of gray instead of black and white. And that's always been very, very important to me. I've always really kind of been bothered by stories that have this very clear cut, he's a good guy, he's a bad guy. And sometimes there's a big twist where the bad guy's actually a good guy, but he's still either a good guy or a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that a lot of games have that, especially in kind of the epic fantasy genre, where it's like, yep, you're going to go save the world from the ancient evil who wants to destroy it, right? Like, that's always the bad guy. He always wants to destroy the world for whatever reason. Sometimes it's, sometimes it's a pretty interesting reason, but it's still, at the end of the day, a lot of times it's just, we are one to prevent the world from being destroyed. And while Jack said, like, we're starting off pretty black and white, like the Soldat are the good guys, and you're actually not 100% sure who the bad guy, like this mysterious entity seems like the bad guy, killing gods, but very rarely is everything ever black and white. It's more told in the idea of kind of change versus not change, or one side versus another side, instead of here's the clear good guys, here's the clear bad guys. And we actually, because choice is important in our game, it's something that it might actually annoy some people. There will rarely be an instance where it's like, that was 100% no matter what the right thing to do. There were no consequences. We killed the bad guy at the end. Based on what choice you pick, a lot of times, or, if someone dies, if someone doesn't die, but, a lot of different things, it's like, it's less about being the right or the wrong choice. It's more about you had to pick from some difficult choices, and it wasn't necessarily right, it wasn't necessarily wrong, but there are consequences to that. And I'm hoping we can kind of really make that an impact, really make that impact on people when they're playing.
Mm-hmm.
Just the idea of, oh man, like, who knows? Maybe, when Ulrich and Amante, like the example you said, they're butting heads. It's like,
yeah,
which
it's
one's
like,
right?
Yeah, and maybe neither of them are right. Maybe neither of them are wrong. Maybe from their point of view, yeah, maybe they're both right. But it's kind of that decision with, it's like, which way do you go, and what is each decision going to have an effect on everything else, whether it be another party member that agrees with or disagrees with that decision, or even just, making a decision that changes, your relationship to like a certain town or country, or, or just a leader of one of those. There's a lot to it. And I almost think it's a more realistic approach in a way, because in life, most things are really kind of gray. I mean, obviously there's going to be things that aren't, but you see all the time that, good people make bad decisions. So it's one of those things where I think it'll almost have a little bit of realism in our fantasy world.
Yeah, that's really the hope. That's something that we've always tried to kind of impart, up to the story, like something that, I mean, I can't really think of any major examples without mentioning, any of them. There's only been a very few examples where it's like there's ever been such one evil bad guy. Like there's a few demons, that show up here and there that are obviously like bad guy. But generally kind of the antagonists have some reason, sometimes like a seriously compelling reason to be doing what they're doing. So yeah, I think that's important, and I'm hoping that kind of makes the world a little more, I won't quite say mature, but a little more developed, I guess, than a lot of kind of your standard fantasy genre of, let's go kill the bad guy and be done with it.
Kill the bad guy, save the world.
Yeah.
We
that's
definitely
not
wanted
to say there's not any of that happening. You are
definitely
fighting from your point bad guys, but we're hoping to leave you more with we've done what needs to be done, then hooray, we are the heroes and the saviors.
Yeah, I definitely think that will go a long way to make our world a bit more interesting. I think there'll be a lot more depth to what we're doing, what the characters are doing, and the decisions behind that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think, and then so the other thing that you guys had mentioned earlier, I just wanted to do another quick point out on is the idea that our characters are all really different, and the idea that they often have kind of differing opinions on what is most important. I think that it really stems from the tabletop origins, where all of you guys are and were and continue to be very different in a lot of different respects. So that's why these characters feel more realized, I think, than a lot of. For example, if I had just sat down and written all these characters, of course I would be trying to make them feel as developed as I possibly could, but there's no way I would be able to achieve the same level of kind of individuality as opposed to the way that they were actually designed, with each different person actually making up a different character. So I think that's something that's really lent to the idea that our characters are meaningful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the fact that our characters are created by a group of people, and each person kind of took a character and made them their own, and made their own decisions, and and we did have some conflict at times based on the decisions that were made. So I think that's what makes our characters a bit more unique, and I think that's why we wanted to take our game and turn it into a video game, because we had these unique stories that we wanted to tell.
Yeah, I like, especially one of my favorite kind of, speaking of characters, one of my favorite things about it is, Jack, you had mentioned that it's kind of a coming of age story for Ulrich. And I think one of the major reasons for that is you literally were playing him as you were coming of age.
Right, yeah, right as I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean, you had to be I don't know exactly when you started playing Ulrich at what age, but I know when you started playing the game, you were very young.
Oh yeah, I was a kid at that point. I think I started playing Ulrich when I was right about 14 or 15.
Mm-hmm.
I basically played that character all through high school.
So yeah, I think that lends itself really well to the idea, the coming of age tale, since that's literally what you were doing at the time. Going from kind of young kid to teenager to young adulthood.
Yeah, and I remember that, because the rest of us, while Jack was in high school, the rest of us were pretty much out of high school at that point, I think, if I remember correctly. So it was just one of those Friday nights where we'd be hanging out, and it's we're just waiting for Jack to come over, because he still has school and stuff, and where we're just a bunch of bums playing video games and stuff while we wait for Jack so we can go play some tabletop.
So yeah, is there anything else I think you want to cover as far as story? I guess I could mention briefly kind of some of the major players in the world.
Yeah,
at least on the continent of Alcratia.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Before you do that, I'll ask Jack. Jack, is there anything that you think that you would want to mention or anything up to this point?
No, nothing further right now. I'm still at the point where I'm tiptoeing about what I can mention.
Yeah, no, understandable.
And just reading about Kevin Sorbo's career.
We're gonna get back to Kevin Sorbo at some point. It's happening.
Definitely. Again, if you know him, just drop him a line.
Yeah, I'd love to have them. That would be amazing.
So Ken,
cool would it be to play a tabletop game with Kevin Sorbo?
It would be pretty sweet.
It'd be amazing. I mean, that would definitely be something that we'd have to stream if that ever happens. So hey guys, if you want us to,
we should have made that our Kickstarter goal.
Yeah, we should have. That was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, who needs art support?
As we hear Moody crying in the distance.
Yeah, poor Moody.
So Ken, let's talk about the players.
All right. So the story in Externus actually covers two different continents, and I'm going to be focusing on kind of the first continent, and actually kind of where more of the major events are taking place, which is the continent of Alcratia. And Alcratia is divided up into several different countries, all which have their own unique kind of cultures, their own unique kind of geographic features, and kind of their own unique people. And I've already mentioned the Kingdom of Lodo is actually one of the big players, where the Kingdom of Lodo is a very militaristic country that long ago they actually had kind of started to try to take over the rest of the continent. Like, they had determined that they wanted to actually be the major player in this world. They wanted to be essentially the empire. So they had begun to invade the rest of the continent, and because they have such a militaristic nature, they were doing quite well, and they were eventually defeated by several of the other countries that banded together to defeat them. But it was a close fight. It was known as the First Alcratian War, and kind of since then they have been kind of. They signed a treaty, obviously, there's been the ceasefire, and everyone had thought that they kind of were starting to turn away from this kind of militaristic invasion-based culture. But once this happened, they suddenly just launched a surprise attack on their neighbors, and at the beginning of the game, there's still not a concrete reason as to why this happened so suddenly. It's not like there was any kind of antagonistic feelings between the different countries. They are definitely not back to their full power yet. They're not like this massive. They have a substantial army, but because they were beaten in the first war, they have a lot of financial issues, and so their country actually. While the armies are marching out, their people are starving. And so one of the kind of unknowns that needs to be found out is what spurred this sudden kind of resurgence in this desire to take over the rest of the continent. So that's one of the major players. Some of the other major countries and players, there's Al-Anon, which is you will actually be visiting Al-Anon several times throughout the course of the game. This is the home of the High Elves, and I don't want to get too deep into why they're here and everything, because again, that's it's something you find out kind of over the course of the actual video game. But they end up being a pretty close ally to your kind of quest. And then kind of one of your other big allies is the country of Flame, which is a desert country, which another one I won't get too detailed into, but I really like kind of the idea of Flame. It's always been one of my favorite countries. They're very honorable, especially the current king of Flame is one of my favorite kind of like lesser NPCs. I've always been very fond of him. And an interesting thing we're doing, which was not in the original game, but kind of came about as an idea from Moody. For those of you who don't know, Moody is originally from Sudan, and he is actually kind of taking a lot of inspiration from that in the visual design, and we've kind of let him really go nuts with it, to where as long as kind of the core ideas and locations and people and everything are still work in the story and still fit, and they're still kind of the original idea, he's really been doing a lot of cool stuff in the visual design, the kind of design of the people, the culture. Like, we've really enabled him to kind of have fun with it and really showcase the pride he has for, kind of his original home. And we haven't shown it publicly yet, but I'm sure you guys, can see it with the level that he made in Flame that we showcased on Teams not that long ago.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to show that off. So once we're able to, we're definitely going to show everybody what that looks like, because it's really cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty gorgeous level. So those are kind of the two countries you'll be interacting with mostly, or not mostly, mainly. Like, they're kind of some of the biggest players. And in addition to that, although you don't have quite as much interaction with them through the course of this kind of story, one of the other major players is the Kingdom of Dezen. And they're known for their paladins. Their country is heavily invested in kind of almost like, old knight chivalry, that kind of code where it's all about honor, duty, kind of valor. Like that's really their creed. And they're not necessarily militaristic, but because of like how strict a code their paladins of Dezen have, they were one of the major, alongside Flame and Alanon, were kind of the three countries that banded together in order to defeat Lodo in the First War. And so they're neighbors with Lodo, and they're one of the countries that's really taking the brunt of this attack. But they're probably either them or Flame are either probably the second and third largest kind of military powers on the continent of Alcratia. So they're pretty important for the fact that they're kind of working together to stem the second invasion from Lodo.
Yeah, I remember the Knights of Dezen. That's definitely one of the things that's seared in my brain from the tabletop game for sure.
So yeah, and then aside from that, I'll just give like a really kind of quick brief overview of some of the other countries. You have Rayos, which actually in the current state is there's a civil war going on in Rayos, because there are two sons to the king, and there was a dispute over kind of succession. So that country is kind of a mess right now, while these two nobles are kind of duking it out to figure out the succession. There is Gotisna, which is a very, very fertile kind of farmland. And they actually supply a lot of food to other countries across the continent. So they worship the goddess of earth. They have a lot of fertile land and pretty big open farmland there. There's the country of Corinth, which may still end up being renamed before the final release of the game, simply because it's the name of a Greek town. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the Greek town, but we'll see. But as of the original name of this country is Corinth. And I've always really liked this country. I've always found it really interesting. But they worship the god of wealth, and there's a lot of mercenaries. Really, there's a lot of nobility. There's a lot of kind of money and power that come out of this country. So they're a pretty neutral country. But yeah, for them, it pretty much always revolves around wealth. There is the country of Calaria. Calaria is a seafaring nation, which is, because of an inside joke, it's really hard to say it's a seafaring nation without laughing about an incident that happened with Ted Wood. Which it's just some stupid inside joke. It wouldn't really be funny to listeners who don't get into it, but just a lot of good memories about our tabletop game. And so they're, because of their seafaring nation, they do a lot of work in importing and exporting between this continent and the other continents. A lot of times, if you need to charter a ship for a voyage, you kind of do it through Calaria. And then I think the last one I haven't mentioned yet is Haas, which is it's a very mountainous, and it's known for its mines. They provide metal, and they sell iron, steel, kind of every metal used across the entire continent, and they export to other continents as well, for everything from horseshoes to spears to swords, pretty much everything imaginable. And they generally are another kind of neutral country where they kind of just want to do their own thing. They want to mine and sell them off, and just continue exploring this huge mountainous region that is right between Haas and Lodo. So yeah, I think that's all the major countries in the continent of Alcratia.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview of the countries and the things going on in between them.
Yeah, I'm hoping it gives it's a difficult thing to say, to just go into kind of what your world is about when it's not quite so black and white, but hopefully that gives you just an idea of like a little bit of the depth of the world, like how many, that's just one continent of this world. There's a lot going on. Even when we were playing the tabletop version, there's a lot going on. There's never one single story thread that's happening. There's always several threads going on. You'll come across something, as you're playing, you'll come across things that just seem to be totally random, and then later down the line, it'll actually pick up a story thread that was related all the way back to this thing that happened a while ago. So it can be a little intense, but I think we've done a good job kind of distilling it to the majorly important things in the main game for the people who just kind of want to do that. But there should be plenty of little stuff throughout the side quests, throughout the kind of unlockable codex entries to really show just how fleshed out this world is.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think overall that's a really good overview of what our world has to offer, for sure. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for us.
Yeah, I know I've been yakking enough. If you or Jack, I don't know if there's anything about the world you want to share. Like, is there anything?
So I mean, there was a couple things that I remembered. Obviously, the seafaring nation, but I also like Corinth. The main thing I remember from Corinth is the Corinth guys.
Yes, the Corinth guys.
And your creative naming schemes there.
So basically what Trevor's talking about is oftentimes throughout their journeys they would come across kind of arena battles where there would be various tournaments happening across the world, and they'd often participate. And after doing so many of these, especially because you're making a whole bracket of different teams that fight each other, sometimes I would be like, I just need to get a couple different groups out here because, if this tournament has 20 guys in it, you guys are only actually fighting a couple of them. So sometimes they would be very specific, like we had the White Stag Knights, and they had a whole thing where they had their emblem of the ivory stag, and and then sometimes there would just be the Corinth guys who were some guys from Corinth.
I always wanted to find out what their group consisted of, but oh well.
I mean, we had. Sometimes we get into the downright silly stuff like the Hawaiian Punch trio.
Which is exactly as it sounds.
Yeah, It was basically 3 of the Hawaiian Punch guys, and they had these devastatingly powerful punches that could blow through armor.
It was ridiculous.
And we had I'm trying to remember this. There was a trio of them as well, but basically, the dancing psycho, who I know is the nemesis of Jax, who
he was tough. All right,
he was just this guy who would just do different dances. They were entirely random. I'd roll a die, and he would shift into one of these dances that would do all kinds of different things. And yeah, I don't remember. I think Jack may have lost to him in one of the tournaments.
Yeah, I can't even remember. I just remember that he was one of those enemies that you made so random that they were absurdly powerful.
Yeah, that's
like the mathematician that we fought, where you just typed in random numbers and into a calculator with different functions, and whatever number came out, that's what the damage he did. And he could have easily have killed all of us.
Yeah, he did anywhere from like 0.5 to like multi-billion damage. Because it was just
we just really lucked out whenever he actually hit us.
So yeah,
was that the accountant?
It may have been.
It might have been, yeah. I can't quite remember the name of him. Just the form of his attacks.
I believe that was the accountant.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'm still determining. I think I want to put that group into the game.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to say too much more, because if you end up putting that group in, because I mean it's kind of a hilarious concept.
I think I might do it. It was a lot of fun. I enjoy the kind of bringing some of the silliness into the game, because the main story it's heavy. I mean it's some serious business. There's a lot of big stuff happening, a lot of serious questions going on, a lot of kind of meta stuff to think about. And yeah, I think it's important to get in. Some of the side quests are a lot more lighthearted and even silly in a lot of situations.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because we had so many silly situations and moments when we played. Like, it's pretty much all the time. I mean, it wouldn't. There were definitely times where we spent more time probably laughing than like getting anything accomplished.
100%.
So, and you talking about arena battles, it just made me think of because I've been going through some of the interview footage and stuff from our players and stuff, and just Gary's most popular. Well, Gary's character that was around the longest, I should say, where the way he joined the party was we were having an arena battle and we needed an extra guy, so we just like pointed to a guy in the crowd. I was like, "Hey, you look like you can fight. Yep. Join us." And then that was it.
That was it. Part of the party ever since.
Just the ridiculousness of that, and the hero machine.
Yeah,
that's the one I was thinking of, was the capsule toy that we got Gary out of.
I can't remember if that was his character before or after the. He had I mean, it's hard to remember when people have had several different characters because they die.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Jack,
good stuff.
You got anything as far as kind of like, is there anything of the world that you found particularly interesting or that stuck with you that, like isn't like a major kind of plot point?
Right. Yeah, most of the things that stuck out were the ones we just mentioned that were mostly like inside jokes. But I did always think it was cool with the different elves, like how we had the elves in our game, but then we also had so many different versions of elves that had different like attunements to the elements or their surroundings, and like the effect that they could have on the character that you played. I always thought that was pretty cool. Yeah,
we had a pretty decent, down the years, a pretty decent set of characters from the different kind of subsets of elves. We had some, basically, it made sense if you're an elf and a wizard, you want to specialize in a particular type of magic to be kind of that attunement of the elf. So solar elf for fire, for example.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job with that. Of basically kind of taking the stuff that, like, however we wanted to customize our character, you would basically make it work. And the fact that like we did have some like sheets and stuff that were set up, but a lot of it was like, well, what do you want to be? I want to be this. It's like, okay, well, let me think for a minute. You have this skill starting out. Based on, you know, whatever, like if you're a mage that wants to do like fire or water or whatever, you would just make something up on the fly and do that. Obviously, we can't do that in a video game.
Yeah.
But I think what we can do is we have a lot of that knowledge of doing that stuff from then that it kind of broadens what we can present out there and put out there, like between varying like player characters and enemies and stuff like that. So
yeah, absolutely. I think like what you said is there are so many times I can remember when someone would just, either someone who had never played a tabletop at all, or even people that were very familiar with like D&D, for example, but then would come over to play our tabletop game, and just like the realization of how open the game actually was would just be like almost mind-blowing to them, you know? Like it'd be like, okay, well, let's make your character. Okay, like what can I be? Where's my list? And it's just like, oh, you can just be whatever you want to be. And just like sometimes it took people a little while to get over that hurdle, because it's not something you see super often, you know. Even obviously, I mean, you can always do it, but still, it's just like it's daunting.
And you could tell for people like their original characters and then their later characters. For, you know, because a lot of like original characters are just like elf archer or, you know, something like that. But then, you know, as they progress, it just becomes like something like completely ridiculous. But you made it work. Yeah,
they're Mr. Jedi.
Yeah, well, I mean, I did that during one of our holiday games.
I know. That's still.
I did the Jedi. The year before that, I did the Shovel Knight when Shovel Knight was like super popular at the time.
The Jedi's fate is still my absolute favorite, because this was during one of our holiday games where kind of after I moved away, and we don't have I mean, we kind of do, but we don't really have the kind of time and capacity to set up like the game every Friday with the whole group like we used to. So we do a game every New Year's, or close to every New Year's, where we have like a smaller campaign, and often it's a little more silly, but it's still set in the world. And Trevor made a character, and like he said, you know, especially when they're these kind of one-off characters, it's fun to make them silly, ridiculous, or just totally like left field. So he made a Jedi character, and like, you know, I took some time trying to figure out how that worked. I got it fit in, like it's not absurdly overpowered like you would imagine a Jedi to be. Like we got it into the game, but he literally never even got to attack, because the first battle we got into, like, and this was purely random, it was just based on the die roll, where the enemy just like basically targeted Trevor. Trevor rolled a miss, like the enemy just rolled the perfect hit. It was just like a crazy combination of die rolls.
Luck was not in my favor.
Yeah, every
Trevor
single
just got
fight.
Slaughtered.
Every fight that happened.
And he literally never got to do anything, and then just died. The enemy just destroyed him. It was crazy. But yeah, it was like, you know, a 1 in a million shot that just, yeah, and I still laugh about that. Of course, we got him a second character to, you know, jump right back in and keep playing. But just the idea of like some of those die rolls.
But you know, that I think that's just tabletop in general. Like sometimes the die rolls are just gonna screw you.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
And that's the chance and luck aspect of playing a game like that. So it comes with the territory. But yeah, that's. I was like, okay, well, there goes that one.
So yeah, I think unless anyone has anything else they want to talk about as far as like lore or story, this would be a good one. If anyone has any questions regarding the world, I mean, obviously you haven't quite dived into it yet, but if you've either just curious or if you played the demo we have up and had some question. I know, for example, one of our Kickstarter backers was asking. He chose the Create a Legend,
yeah.
And he was asking about basically what kind of race he could make his legend, and we just kind of answered, going back and forth about pretty much whatever. Like, we'll make it work, we'll figure it out. And I believe he was, in his last comment, was talking about making a kobold type character, which I thought was pretty interesting for his legend. So, yeah, any questions like that, I really love. I love talking about the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have any of those questions, just email us social media at winterborngames.com. And and I'll basically, if once we get a bunch of those, I'll throw them in the old bucket, and then we'll just have a Q&A that we'll answer on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's I think we pretty much covered at least a good overview of what our story and world is like. Throughout this. So again, thank you all for listening. Remember, the Kickstarter's up till the 18th. So if you haven't supported us, please help and support us. Get this game funded on Kickstarter. We would appreciate it, and we appreciate everybody who's helped us so far.
We are currently at 56% of our goal with 202 backers. So that is amazing. Thank you guys. But as Trevor said, we're still working on it. So if you can back, even if it's a small amount, or if you can't, just share it and let everyone know about it. Hopefully we can kind of, we still have a little ways to go, but we might be able to blow past it. We're still getting a lot of pledges coming in, so we're hoping we can make it to the finish line.
Yep, that's our hope and goal. But yeah, you can follow us at Winterborn Games on everything. And if you want to go to the Kickstarter directly, it's just bit.ly/Externus. And you can find it there, or just go to externusgame.com, and we have it, plastered all over the website for you to just have an easy click to get to the Kickstarter, and we appreciate that. So I think that covers everything. Thanks for listening, guys.